we have a wood stove. And it's not an accident that we have a wood stove. Why we have a wood stove on this episode of the Driving with Rob podcast. Have you ever lived in a house or owned a house or visited a house that has a wood stove? Well, we have a wood stove, and it's no accident that we have a wood stove. Actually, it is a fireplace insert with a blower. And because of the way our house is built, because of the way our house is laid out, with a fire in the wood stove and the blower running, it pretty much heats my whole house. My furnace rarely comes on in the wintertime. My son has 2 fireplace inserts at his house. Another son has access to a fireplace where he can build a fire if he wants to. And my oldest son doesn't have a wood stove or a fireplace, but wishes he did. Well, here's the thing. My grandfather had a wood-burning stove in his house. His house was over 100 years old. It had 4 chimneys or 4 fireplaces in the house because it was an old house. Because back in the old days, that's the way you heated your house. If you didn't have a fireplace or a wood stove, you would freeze to death in the winter. And my dad, in the last house that we lived in, had a wood stove. So I grew up with it. I grew up cutting and splitting firewood. And because we've lived in the house we're in now for over 20 years, my boys grew up cutting, hauling, and splitting firewood. Well, the reason our house has a fireplace is because when we were looking at houses 20 some odd years ago, I told my wife I will never again live in a house without a fireplace. And the reason I said that was about 25 years ago or so, give or take, there was a big ice storm that came through North Carolina. Well, at that time, we only had 3 kids, and we lived in a much smaller house. And one of the reasons we live in the house we live in now is because we had 2 more children, and we ran out of space in the old house. But I digress. But about 25 years ago or so, it was sometime in the early to mid-90s, we had a freak ice storm come through North Carolina. Power lines were down all over the state, and we were out of power for at least 3 days. I want to say it was 5 days, but it was at least 3 days. Well, we had electric heat. And even if you have a gas furnace, you need a little bit of electricity to run the igniter and the blower fan and the control circuit for the furnace. Well, this particular house was total electric. Well, it's not unusual to have ice storms in the South. As a matter of fact, it is much more likely that we have an ice storm than a snowstorm. But this particular year, and this particular storm, it didn't just warm up the next day like it normally does down south. It stayed cold for a week, so the ice didn't go away. And there were so many people without power because the ice storm took down so many limbs and trees and knocked down so many power lines. Plus, the inclement weather made repairs very difficult. So it was several days that we were without power. We had no way to heat our house. Lows got down into the teens and 20s at night. Never got much above freezing during the day for about a week. At one point, it got down to 45 degrees inside the house. And we borrowed kerosene heaters. I think we had borrowed 2 kerosene heaters. That's why it didn't get any colder inside our house. It was very, very cold outside. And what we did to stay warm at night, I slept with one of the kids And my wife put the other 2 in bed with her so we could stay warm at night. So when my wife got pregnant with number 4 and we started looking for a bigger house, I said, I will never have another house without a fireplace. Because there are certain things you do for survival. And this year, with this COVID-19 thing going on, people who have never thought about it before have become acutely aware of things that can happen, that can hurt you, that you have no control over, and can seriously endanger your life. And cold, frigid weather is one of those things that can seriously endanger your life if you don't have some way to get warm. So I have a wood stove, or a fireplace insert, because I had determined a long time ago that I would never be that cold again with no way to get warm. Like Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, with God as my witness, I will never be hungry again. I decided I would never be cold again. So, this time of year, we cut, split, haul, stack, and burn firewood. And for people who don't have a wood stove or have never had a wood stove, it seems odd or quaint that we would have a wood stove. But it's no accident that we have a wood stove. We didn't just happen to buy a house with a fireplace. It only took one really, really cold winter with no way to make heat to teach me a lesson. And just like with the COVID-19 virus, once you go through a situation where survivability is your number one priority, you learn how to cope with it. So yeah, having a heat pump or an electric furnace is very convenient. It's very clean. All you have to do is change the filters for the blower. You don't have to cut wood. You don't have to split wood. You don't have wood chips and sawdust and the potential for bugs getting into your house as you carry in the firewood. Electric heat is very convenient. And it works really, really well 99.9% of the time. But if the power goes out in the winter, with God as my witness, I will never be that cold again. And that's why I have a wood stove. Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading. If you're not a subscriber, you should be. Click on subscribe. If your particular podcast player says follow instead of subscribe, click on that. And in that way, every time I download an episode, you'll get a notification to let you know. All right? If you like the podcast, tell your friends about it. Share it on Facebook. All you have to do to find me is go to Google and do a Google search, The Driving with Rob Podcast. I'm on Spotify. I'm on iTunes. Any place you go to listen to podcasts, you can find me. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.